Welcome to the Functional Neurologic Disorders Society podcast. I'm your host, Erica Cotton, coming to you from Chicago, Illinois, with a special thanks to Michael Romeo, our production engineer, coming to us from Australia, and our content curator, Ingrid Hertzauer, from the UK. This is a 3-part panel series exploring FND across the international arena. Part 1 includes FND diagnosis, access, and discussion of treatment landscapes. Part 2 includes FND culturally relevant factors within the biopsychosocial spiritual model, and Part 3 covers FND research, funding, and international collaborations. My gracious guests include Dr. Lucia Tesolin, currently in Peru, but with prior experience in Italy, Great Britain, and Switzerland. Dr. Sonja Rutten from the University of Amsterdam, the Netherlands, providing input on the Dutch and FND. Dr. Takamichi Kanbayashi from Tokyo, presently learning FND in Edinburg, the UK. Dr. Lucas de Andreas at the University of São Paulo, Brazil, Dr. Chrisma Pretorius at Stellenbosch University in South Africa, and Dr. Sanjay Pandey, presently in Delhi, India. As a host, these conversations felt like a window into the world of FND across the international landscape, seeing what FND education, practice, care, and research is really like day to day in these different regions. I found these speakers, their work, and their perspectives to be so thoughtful, commendable, and inspiring, and also a clear highlight of just how much work there is to be done in FND across the world. I hope you enjoyed this series as much as I did. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining me again. I'm so excited to hear from everyone about research on FND, each individual's sort of experiences with research within FND, within various countries, regions, and then everyone's thoughts about international approach to research for FND collaborations, where things might converge, where we might need divergences, and all in all, just appreciating the work everyone's doing and looking to soak up some knowledge. So thank you. Why don't we get started with Chrisma and hear about various research and your own research in South Africa? I'm very excited.
Thank you, Erica, for the opportunity. So in South Africa, where healthcare resources are already stretched, FND is rarely seen as a priority despite its growing impact. And our public health system doesn't yet have the infrastructure or specialist capacity to diagnose and manage FND properly, which makes research in this area absolutely vital. And on top of that, funding for FND research is incredibly limited. Most local funding focuses on big issues like HIV, tuberculosis or TB, and now mental health more broadly, leaving conditions like FND in the shadows. So that's why collaboration and advocacy is so important. There are some potential avenues for funding in South Africa. We have the National Research Foundation, which is South Africa's main research funding agency. And it offers various grants and competitive funding for niche areas. But obviously, there's a lot of people competing for the same type of funding. And then there's the South African Medical Research Council, which supports research that contributes to better health outcomes. FND research could attract funding under themes like mental health, neurological disorders, those kind of things. But again, very competitive in South Africa. And then there's like small internal grants from universities where they provide seed funding, support young researchers to do research and give travel grants to attend conferences and all of those things. So all in all, really very, very limited funding in South Africa for FND specifically.
Yeah. I'm saddened but not surprised to hear that. That kind of sounds what we would expect, but needs to have a shift. Chrisma, you mentioned, so your background or your current practice or career is in primary research, which is atypical. I feel like most of us are clinicians, fall into FND clinically, and then sort of do research on the side or as an addition, but you focus more on research and do FND. So how, as a researcher, as you've said, there's so few researchers on FND, so few research funding mechanisms for FND. How did you get into FND as a researcher?
Thank you for that question, Erica. It is, it was quite interesting. It was through a master's student that I actually stumbled across a study on functional seizures. And I was new in the department. No one wanted to take this student on because it's a topic that no one is interested in. And I was a very young and ambitious researcher at the time. And that's about 15 years ago now. And I said, well, I'll take on this research. And shortly after that, we published a paper on the research. And I was invited to join the functional dissociative seizure task force of the International League Against Epilepsy as the African collaborator. And for the past 15 years, I've been working quite closely with them, with people like Marcus Rieber, Kurt Lefrance, and those people. And that has been really great to put FND on the map in South Africa. So that's really how I stumbled into the field. I got very, very interested in the field. And ever since, the majority of my students work on functional seizures mainly, but also branching out now to FND. So yeah, that's in a nutshell how I got into the field.
Wonderful. Isn't it always just so interesting? Because, my background into FND as well was just happenstance. Like I happened to be on the EMU, my rotation was on the EMU. And of course, everyone who knows functional seizures knows the EMU is where you see a ton of functional patients with functional seizures. And, similar, the epileptologist just said, you look like you actually want to talk with these people, or you're not super, afraid, or, do you want to treat them? And I was like, I don't know anything about treating them. And then I looked up, functional seizures and found Kurt, right? He's just been such a beacon of education and awareness. And I was like, okay, I feel like I can probably do this decently if I get trained. And, so I feel like Kurt's been such a wonderful gateway for so many people to approach FND. And it's like, get in through functional seizures, and then this whole world of FND just kind of opens up. So I'm glad that someone's had a similarly serendipitous path where it's like, oh, this is a thing. I didn't know this. This is actually a really cool brain thing and really relevant to people and patients' lives and impact. And it's just such an area where there's just everything is so untouched, right, in terms of research and opportunities and needs. And it's just sort of like, well, gosh, there's so much work to do here. Roll up the sleeves and you can make a whole career out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree. Yes.
So I'm wondering from your perspective, Chrisma, given you've been in FND research so long, where do you think, I think we've advanced a lot. I think we have expanded various subtype awareness and understanding, especially, like you said, building out different countries' access. Where do you think FND research needs to go from an international perspective? Do we need to keep working in our own countries? Do we think we need to build more multicultural awareness? Do you think we need to expand? What can we create consistencies? Where do we need to keep things separate or aware of differences? What are your thoughts on that?
Erica. Yes, my broad vision is that we should really work together across the world. I think there's so much similarities. Yes, there's differences, but there's a lot of similarities where people don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from each other. We can work together, especially if you think in terms of worldwide, low to middle income countries, for example, that can learn from each other and create interventions and those kind of things that's applicable. Yes, there's cultural differences, but again, there's a lot of similarities. The basics are the same. So I definitely think there's value in working together globally more than everyone working in isolation on their own. And I'm experiencing that already in South Africa, where the research that's being done, globally is also applicable to South Africa. And that helps with creating the awareness around FND and help with creating the interventions with healthcare providers, informing them with the stigma that's attached to it and all of that. So I'm a big advocate for working together and collaborating internationally.
Yeah, So I'm hearing from your perspective, there's still so much more to learn from each other and so much benefit from sharing resources, sharing knowledge, sharing progress, than there is any need to keep things siloed or as specific. I think we talked about cultural factors that I think maybe might, add slight tweaks to various things, but the large majority of information, knowledge, resources is easily sort of translatable or interchangeable across different international arenas. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Chrisma. I want to go hear about everyone's individual current, sort of research projects or areas that they are actively working on, or, kind of spheres. But before we get to that, let's kind of round out everyone else's experience within their countries and cultures on approach to research, and then circle back with, if we have time, with everyone's sort of current undertakings. So let's go to Lucas now. Lucas, can you tell us about FND research funding mechanisms, availability, how easy that is versus hard?
It's very hard to have sponsors in FND here in Brazil. We're very incipient in this topic in our country. We have a few clinics specialized in FND, and to give you an idea, at the last Brazilian Congress of Neurology, which was in last year's November, there was only one lecture on FND among the 9 conference rooms, and the number of attendees was fewer than 20. So even our neurology community, Brazilian community, doesn't give importance to this kind of topic. So because of our way of thinking as a Brazilian neurology community and psychiatry community, I think the sponsors will be even fewer, because we as a professional must give the importance to the theme, and then we can convince the government, the pharmaceuticals and many sponsors to sponsor FND study and to make it a better scientific topic. And one thing that I always think is, in our medical school here in Brazil, I don't know if it's in your country as well, during my grad, I had only one lecture on FND, and during my neurology training, I had a one as well. So, and I had around 10 or 15 discussions on myasthenia gravis and other rare conditions. We are training the neurology trainees not to focus on FND, not to give the real importance to it. And I think was Jeanette's article in Brains that said that a 14-year study, prospective study, this population with FND, they died more. I think it's not the really word, but they had more mortality rates than the normal population. So it's way prevalent. So it's, I think it's a health issue, a very important health issue that government and healthcare doesn't give the proper focus.
Yeah, the proportionality seems off, right? The high prevalence rates that neurologists see FND, the base rates of FND, versus like you're saying, these more rare neurologic conditions, versus the training, the time, the resources, the funding that's devoted to them does seem, it is disproportionate. Those are really great insights, Lucas. Thank you. And especially given your training in Brazil, it's such a unique perspective on where emphasis is placed, right? And how to change that. So with such limited exposure, how did you become interested in FND, and where was your foothold in that?
Well, I really love to examine patients. This is one of the reasons I chose neurology. I think it's one of the very few specialties that still examine properly the patient. And with FND, you have to be you have to know, examine it fully and try to find the positive signs. And I think this is one of the reasons. So the other reason is that I almost became a psychiatrist, and I think that because of it, maybe I try to see the patient more than a disease, and I got in contact with the FND clinics here in our Institute of Psychiatry, and I saw how these patients suffer from us as healthcares, and how they were treated back in our neurology hospital, and they were so mistreated. Our contact as healthcares is so violent with them that I thought maybe I should do something different and try to help these people with a different perspective, and maybe if I can change one fellow or trainee, maybe I'm doing something better for them. So this is why I chose FND.
What a beautiful and inspirational story. And gosh, it's so funny, the brain doesn't end at neurology, right? Like there's this whole other part of brain process that this whole other field of psychiatry, deals with. And it's so interesting when people think, well, no, it just ends at if there's not structural, then we're done. Then the brain, then it's just all in your head.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's great that you, gosh, what a perfectly combined interest at the right location at the right time to then make a choice, to then have this outcome. And gosh, you're certainly doing amazing work in really a grassroots efforts to change awareness. And I bet you are making such a difference with even the mindset that you have. And I think even if other providers hear the way FND is discussed as a valid condition, as a condition that comes from the brain, as patients who deserve to be treated with respect and dignity and are worthy of, getting healed and receiving the intended medical care and intended effect of medicine as a practice, it can really change perspectives where they're like, oh, this isn't just something they're faking or, in their head or just a drain of resources. These are people who need help too. So it's just wonderful that you're in the field and you took the steps that you did, seemingly in a challenging landscape where there's not a whole lot being offered in Brazil, unfortunately, and even less so than with funding. Gosh, well, Lucas, thank you so much for sharing that. That's such a inspiring and motivating and applaudable approach to FND.
Yeah.
Thank you. And also, your English is significantly better than any part of my Portuguese. So you are doing amazing. I'm always so impressed when people talk with me. I'm like, I'm sorry I'm making you use English. I promise you it's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're doing great. And I know you have to hop off for another meeting. So if we're not hearing from Lucas later on in the podcast, everyone just know that Lucas is very busy in Brazil, attempting to change the lives of all younger students and improve the lives of patients. So thank you, Lucas. That's been so helpful.
Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucia, can you tell us about Peru? So what has been your experience with research for FND in Peru? What are the funding mechanisms? Love to hear from you, Lucia.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to explain that I'm an Italian neurologist, a clinician, and I managed the FND clinic for 5 years in a hospital in the north of Italy, in Bolzano. But now I'm working in Peru because I presented a project about FND to the European Union, and I won a research fund for researcher abroad. Since the years of the University of the Neurology residency, I specialized on FND in Edinburgh with John and in Switzerland with Selma. And on the other side, before I've been carrying out volunteering activities in different parts of Africa. So I noticed all the socio-cultural, epidemiological differences that greatly influence FNDs. And I had this dream to run a research project in a developing country where there are no facilities in terms of recognition of time for clinicians to conduct research. So otherwise, it would never have been possible to find in a Latin American country, I think, but surely in Peru, a possibility to do a research here. Here, if you enroll in a PhD, you have to pay for university fees that are quite high, and you are not paid in the meantime. The research grants amount to a maximum of $3,000 that are obviously doesn't cover a salary for a doctor, and obviously there are no bursary about FND. So with regard to the type of research I choose the research about treatment. So it would be useful to support, I think, projects that investigate treatment protocols in Latin America that are accessible to the patients. Because the English inpatient protocol is impractical here because the hospitals are full. For example, the Rebagliati Hospital, where I'm working, the reference for all Peru, is an high-level center, but it serves like 5 million inhabitants. And always the department is full, and the list for physiotherapy is very, very long, and usually patients doesn't have access to therapy during the admission. So the rehabilitation department are overloaded and have a long waiting list, usually 6-9 months. Also for stroke, so it's really hard, and they only offer 4 sessions with a 4-session possibility in addition, and only for neurological diagnosis. So there is no plan for FNDs. My research project stems from these needs, so I try to provide each patient with information on the diagnosis of FND, sending educational material, and furthermore for code F44, because here they use the ICD-10 corresponding to the diagnosis of conversion disorder. There are the sick days calculation system from EsSalud, from the social health system, corresponds provides just 10 days for disease. 10 days that are really not so much. Yeah, of course. So obviously, this often doesn't allow the patient to recover from its deficit, and often ends in a declaration of a permanent disability and the loss of work if the patient doesn't improve immediately. So regarding my research protocol, I briefly take my research as an example. I have tried to offer a program of 8 sessions, the maximum that the public system offers, and it should last 3 months, but many patients have missed a lot of sessions due to the transport strike, because it lasted like 3 months. There was no transport because of criminality, and all the bus driver did the strike. And also because many patients are female and do have children, and they don't have anyone that at home can take care of the children during the session. And also because there are no the job permits to attend to the session of the treatment. So yeah, the situation is really difficult. And regarding, in addition, to avoid the very long waiting list of rehabilitation department, I worked with the Department of Complementary Medicine, which has a physiotherapist, a psychologist, and a nurse who is trained to perform yoga and Tai Chi. That is to take advantage of a multidisciplinary service that already exists in the public health system to avoid long waiting lists. This is the only research project about FND in Peru, But as I can see till now, almost all patients are going better, and many of them have come back to the work. And this is the first example of a specialized treatment in a public health system in all Latin America, as far as I know. So I would like it to be transformed into an institutional service. Unfortunately, the system is not so open to a change, but I hope it will work because I still have like 8 months here, so I'm working on it. And obviously, I asked the FND support to support me in getting this proposal accepted. For example, I think involving also the WHO can be a choice because WHO is recognized here, so it can be a choice. And regarding future perspective and international cooperation, I think it is essential. My project had 2 aims. The first is patient education on FND through brief, simple messages that capture the interest via social media. In this regard, I created an informational video in Spanish, similar to those created by Selma and Victor Mayordomo. But this time I used metaphors that are easily understandable for Peruvians, like the brain not as a computer, but as a football coach or as a chef of a restaurant, because it has to be easier to be understandable. And it is an important tool for neurologists because usually they do have just 15 minutes for the evaluation. So it can help to save time to explain the diagnosis. And as the second aim, we have to create a network of Spanish-speaking Latin American professionals who spread knowledge to colleagues in each country. The Spanish network is important since I noticed that in Peru there is some resistance towards English language for socio-political reasons and language reasons, but there is more openness to access to publication from Argentinian, Colombian, Mexican groups that speak Spanish. So in this regard, in August 2024, I organized with EsSalud, with the health system, an online international symposium entirely in Spanish on the neurological diagnosis of FND, and with speakers also from US, as Alberto Spy, and we gained 400 participants. So the recording was later published on YouTube and gathered as many viewers. So due to the success of this initiative, in November, I organized an 8-session course, this time about treatment, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, mindfulness therapy, psychotherapy. And this event was free of charge and also attracted 300 therapists. So this success demonstrates the need for specific training on the FND, and ideally free of charge to include most therapists. And for this reason, I am organizing the first Latin American International Conference of FND, this time in presence, entirely in Spanish, that will run on the 20th and 21st of November. And on this occasion, we would like to announce the founding of the Latin American FNDS group, with the goal of translating more material about FND in Spanish and to support the local educational initiative. And we have already requested and obtained FNDS accreditation. So that's a great objective.
That's amazing. Wow, what a helpful initiative. But one of the things that really struck me as you were saying is basic FND programs and resources just didn't exist, right? Which I think might actually is likely the case across so many different countries. And so from a research perspective, anything that is being done is research, is publishable, is useful information for governments, healthcare agencies, international agencies to be aware of. of progress and steps to further then justify, right? And thank goodness you publish on, okay, we started this clinic, it worked. Hey, people got better, right? Because that begins to show the evidence base and then can create more and more change, which is just so wonderful. And I think that is such an atypical thing about FND relative to other conditions that are so well known, right? If you did a treatment for, a sinus infection with an antibiotic, it's not going to be groundbreaking research. But for FND, even telling people, improving, provider understanding and provider education can then be measured to have a significant impact, or simple interventions can be measured to have an impact, and it's meaningful and can create policy change or training change and direction of resources, which is just so important, but so simple and foundational. We are still at such, foundational stages in a lot of different countries. The other piece that I love that you're highlighting, Lucia, is about the role of including native languages in the education of FND and a community, right? Where individuals in languages that are comfortable to them talk about FND, be in a community that knows about FND, and have these spheres where they can feel comfortable and get resources and build provider practice and research-based communities. And it sounds like you're building that out for Latin American countries, which is so commendable. But what a huge undertaking. My goodness. But it's amazing. And I can't wait. You'll have to let us know, give me all the details, and we'll be sure to publicize your FND conference in Spanish in Spanish. That's so amazing. But I feel like that would be an excellent model to just kind of replicate across various international regions, right? Yeah. We have Asia, we have Eastern Europe, we have all these other regions that may have, at least we can probably there can be unified language or culture in some ways that would probably really benefit from similar collaborations, models, spaces to engage in talking about FND within a culturally specific and geographically specific location. It's so great to hear. And thank you for providing those models. That's so amazing. That's excellent. Thank you.
I thank you for this opportunity to share all the challenges.
Right. So many challenges. But it sounds like you also had great preparation and research with, I'll definitely be sure to update your bio to include Italy, Britain, Switzerland, in addition to Peru. It's amazing. What a reach. I want to be sure and be mindful of people's time, but I want to hear, especially from Sonja, about it's more of a European representation. We've got such great coverage between South Africa, Brazil, Peru, European representation. So Sonja, can you tell us a little bit about FND in the Netherlands and FND research funding, FND approach to research? What's been your experiences?
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for the invitation. So in general, I think that research is appreciated in the Netherlands. There are multiple funding opportunities, both in the Netherlands and in Europe, of course. And we talked a little bit about cultural differences in the last podcast, and also about how Dutch like to get stuff done. And I think that also shows in our scientific productivity. We have a citation impact score that is above the global average, and we are very productive when it comes to output, just writing stuff down, creating articles. So I think in general, the academic culture and the opportunities are pretty good in the Netherlands. Although the current government is trying to pull back money from academia, which is, of course, a shame. That being said, for FND specifically, there are, as far as I'm aware, no calls or funding opportunities. So I feel like it often, if I write a research proposal, I always have to try to rephrase it so that it fits into this call that is actually for something else. So it's always very tricky to do that, I think most of the larger studies that have been conducted in the Netherlands that were funded by a combination of small grants or personal grants, but no FND specific calls, which is a shame because it's such a common and disabling condition and so much work needs to be done still. I am very happy to say that after writing a lot of grant applications, I finally got a funding from one of the larger Dutch funding agencies for FND. So I was very, very happy with that. It's a small grant, but I hope it's this turning point where these organizations start seeing FND as an interesting and legitimate condition that also deserves scientific attention. So I'm very hopeful about the future in that sense. I think that when it comes to research in FND in general in the Netherlands, there is an increasing interest among researchers, like there is globally. And I think that is very hopeful for many patients in particular. So we see that more and more people start doing research in FND or start educating or start treating patients in the first place. So I think that the situation is going to be better and better over the coming years. And we are carefully starting to do some local collaborations here as well. Personally, I got into the FND research a couple of years ago. I actually have a background in research in Parkinson's disease, neuropsychiatric symptoms in Parkinson's disease. But as I started seeing FND patients in clinic here as a hospital psychiatrist, I fell in love with the FND population. And then I decided that I also wanted to focus my research on this group. I think it's particularly interesting because there is so much that we still need to figure out when it comes to disease mechanisms. There are so many things that we need to improve when it comes to care. We need to do more research on treatments. I think even though research is increasing rapidly, we are still in for FND, it's still in its infancy, and there is so much work to be done. And I think that is what actually motivates me most. There are so many things that we can still do, and it's easy to have a meaningful contribution with relatively simple, basic research. So, for example, the funding that I received was for developing an online module to just provide patients with proper education about FND, which seems very simple, but even in the Netherlands, where FND care is not too bad compared to other countries, we still see that a lot of neurologists don't have the time or the training to properly inform their patients. So even these very small studies can make a meaningful difference, I feel. And I think that's very, very motivating. And that's what I really like about FND research.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It is still so fascinating to hear that, in relatively speaking, a highly advanced, country with great social resources and medical system overall, not without challenges, every country does, but overall, having frequent resources, yet still FND is barely on the funding, sort of barely on the radar of funding of clinical care, which is shocking and sad, but just it feels like it just kind of fell right between the gaps of psychiatry and neurology, and just sat there for about 100 years, and just really wasn't thought of. I also hearing as you're speaking about these smaller funding mechanisms, small scale funding from institutions, right? Institutions do seed funding for younger universities or smaller projects that can be really meaningful. And as you said, create and open the door to show that these things are important. But I've also found, and I think this was similar to your experience getting into FND, Chrisma, was other neurologic organizations for other neurologic conditions then offering funding because, like the American Epilepsy Society or the International League Against Epilepsy has sort of taken in functional seizures and has gratefully, thank goodness, owned functional seizures. What if they didn't? Where would we be? I feel like most of our research, a lot of our research and funding, and even publications from FND are in epilepsy journals. Bless all the epileptologists who've allowed that to happen. They could have just easily said, nope, take this somewhere else. And similarly, as you were saying, Sonja, I think a lot of the Movement Disorder Society, International Movement Disorder Society, have accepted FND under the specialties, but the fields and the larger fundings for these conditions, it's as you said, sort of square peg, round hole, trying to fit FND under these other mechanisms and convince them. But it's been interesting that and thank goodness we've had support from other conditions. That feels like the wrong way to say it, but it feels like that within the research field and even clinical field sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we need the support, and we need to be able to sort of, tag along with the other disorders to be able to study a little bit of this and there. I think it's going to be like that for a couple of years more, but hopefully with all the work we're doing now, funders will also see the huge impact that the research that is conducted as we speak will actually improve the lives of our patients and have not only an important impact on their quality of life, but also on society, healthcare costs, etc., because I think it's going to make a huge difference. Yeah, exactly. I have to say a huge difference with the other speakers is also that we in the Netherlands, I'm not sure what it's like in the other countries, but at some institutions and hospitals, we have the luxury of getting dedicated research time. So I am very, very lucky to have 1 day of research time that I can sort of decide on how to spend.
Do you need grant funding in order to have that? Like if you don't have a grant, that time goes away, or is that time just there regardless?
It's there for a couple of years. So if I don't start making any money soon, they'll probably take it at some point. But I'm getting the opportunity to apply for grants for a couple of years. And I'm very lucky to have a boss who appreciates not only the writing of grants, but also other academic tasks like educating colleagues about FND, writing chapters in study books and stuff like that. Because, well, I think that more needs to be done than just doing research. There's so much that still needs to be done. And I feel very, blessed to have this opportunity to spend that time and get paid for it as well.
Yeah, where there's value seen in that. It's fundable value. It's not just you're seeing a patient and billing for it. And it's a very medical capitalistic model versus there is utility and value in you spending your time creating research, creating training, building awareness. That is wonderful. And that's aspirational, I think, for other countries and organizations to build out that protected time and show value. And I think that might be a societal shift where society says we value this, therefore it should be something that is covered and we should pay someone to do this because it is meaningful and it improves overall societal health, wellness, and productivity, right? Yeah, that's such a great point, Sonja. Thank you. Our listeners are probably going to want to briefly mention the funding in the U.S., so I'll briefly cover that. And I know several of you, I'm sure, have applied for funding within the U.S. Sonja, I know you and I have been on grants together. Within the U.S., most people are more familiar with the model, funding by the national government with similar and smaller scale fundings at institutional level, startup funding, and similar to others who have already spoken. Any FND sort of research applications have come through the NINDS, so the National Institute of Neurologic Disorders and Stroke. And prior to starting our recording, we were chatting about the NINDS's first FND specific request for funding, first of its kind, which even then, that's kind of wild, right? If you think about it, as in, the funding history of the US, there's never been one specific to FND until recently. There's been one, and it's about to shut down, right? And it's been on for just a few years. And even then, in speaking from my experience, and granted, as our audience is listening, I'm not a primary researcher. I'm a sort of adjunctive researcher to clinical work, et cetera. But in applying to this funding mechanism and hearing from colleagues, it's been very difficult to obtain funding, even for this FND specific call, right? It was created to fund FND projects, and very few have actually been funded over the few years that this program or opportunity has been in place, which I think represents further barriers. And one of the barriers that we have observed, I mean, I don't know if this has been the case in other countries with reviewers who are reviewing grant applications, is a lack of familiarity with FND or a negative bias against FND, even in the reviewer process in the US for a funding announcement that was for FND, where one of the reviewers essentially said, well, I think this is in everyone's head and they don't need treatment. And it's like, where do we go with this? How do we fix this level of issue? And I don't know if that's been the same in other countries as well, even if there are funding mechanisms. Gosh, first one in the US ever. We're so far, not much to say other than, wow, we're behind, right? But even once we get there, this barrier of, but then reviewers are not as familiar. Has that been the case in others' experience regarding reviewer familiarity with FND being a barrier to receiving research funding?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I recognize what you're saying about the specific funding opportunity in the United States. We actually saw negative bias from some of the panel members, which was shocking to us. Mm-hmm. But also in the Netherlands, I once put out an application, and they were hesitant about whether it was for brain diseases, and they were not sure whether FND could be considered as a brain disorder in the first place. So yeah, that's tricky.
Oh, yep. We have uphill battles. There are lots of educational needs across clinical and research spheres. I mean, because in order to have an effective research mechanism or an effective research establishment procedure, avenues, pathways, there has to be education at each step and prioritization at each step, and sort of so many pieces need to fall in line. And I think there's a lack of expertise among reviewers at various, grant funding for various conditions. But I think it's probably more extreme in FND in my experience, where, I don't think someone reviewing an MS application would say, well, MS isn't even really a neurologic condition, or, MS is just in someone's head, so we don't need to treat it. I don't think other neurologic conditions are quite at the level of lower education, disbelief, stigma that FND is. But Chrisma or Lucia, is it similar in Peru or in other countries you've been involved with, Lucia or Chrisma, in South Africa?
Yes, Erica, exactly the same. Well, there's never been a call for FND as such, specifically, but I can speak from my experience, even students trying to look for funding of their research projects, PhD students and that, where people just don't know what it is. They don't have the knowledge, the reviewers, like you mentioned, and then they just don't get the funding, despite very good proposals, very well motivated research. It's just not funded. So definitely the same experience in South Africa.
Thank you for highlighting that, Chrisma, which is such an important point. If students' projects aren't being funded, then how can they then develop careers, right? And it's so, if that's not the starting point, then it's so hard as primary researchers to switch careers, right? Because as everyone, if our listeners aren't aware, in order to get research funding, you often have to show that you have a track record with the condition you're applying for funding for. So if there's never been opportunities up to that point, and they have to get specialty research experience or credentials sort of in one condition and then pop over to FND once they're no longer a student, right? Then that's a really hard transition to make, arguing lack of specialty training throughout, or a lack of academic history with that. Gosh, yeah, starting even at the basics of, we're not funding students' projects, so then how can we expect, that we will then get advanced researchers, junior researchers, mid-career researchers, senior researchers in FND. Lucia, what's been your experience? Because you've been through this at multiple stages, kind of in multiple countries. Oh, you're muted.
Well, the situation in Peru is similar to South Africa or worse. As I told, there are no funding for research. There is no possibility to do research because it's not paid, because they don't give you time to do research if you are a doctor. There's a problem at the baseline. But I agree with Chrisma about the education. It's really important to start from education and education in universities. So that's why now I'm trying to go to universities and to give some lectures to the students from medical school or psychology or physiotherapy. And I would like to invite also universities in the conference, in the international conference, just to order the professor to the international conference, just to share the knowledge.
Yeah, that's wonderful, right? Yeah, and I think that's such an atypical thing. Can you imagine inviting universities to a movement disorders conference or an epilepsy conference and be like, well, why do we need to go to that? We know everything about that. But for FND, and especially I think this is Lucia, where you were mentioning the importance of especially initially offering these as free services, right, for professors, for institutions to come and learn that it should be represented, that it should be part of the curriculum and part of the training or part of the funding for students or support should be offered, is so basic. But Sonja, I really liked your phrasing, so basic and simple, but so impactful, right? It can have such a huge impact on shaping the course of education, funding, availability, and treatment for individuals in those regions, which is so important. I want to be so mindful of everyone's time. I just love our conversations in terms of what everyone's doing, how everyone's doing it, and just it's always so inspiring to hear. But gosh, as you said, Sonja, there's just so much work to do. It's just having these conversations just highlights the amount of work that needs to happen on a global scale for FND. But how inspiring it is to hear from each of you all and know that you are all just working away so diligently in each of your corners of the world, which is amazing. And I'm sure our listeners will feel the same and be so grateful to hear to get these sort of window into what FND, as we've talked about in prior podcasts, clinical practice experiences, but now, from a research perspective of really trying to advance understanding and treatment of this important condition, what it really looks like on the ground, which is a lot of people working really hard to get basic things in place and just really putting in tons of effort in a very inspiring way. And I appreciate that everyone's feeling motivated and inspired and feels like this is meaningful and impactful work. But man, I think there's plenty of room for long careers in FND based on everything we're hearing. So thank you so much, everyone. I really, really appreciate the time, and our listeners will as well. So thank you. Physicians and providers treating functional seizures, we invite you to participate in a brief survey examining driving recommendations for patients with functional seizures. Developed by a dedicated study group, this survey seeks to capture the current opinions of physicians worldwide on this topic. Please take a moment to share your experience. A link to the 5-minute survey can be found in the show notes.